Hey there, welcome to this recap of Mark 3 from our Tuesday Bible study. We got through chapter 3 of Mark, and so I wanted to share this with you and go through some of the things that we talked about, as well as prepare a little bit for the sermon for Sunday, because it will also cover the same material. But before we go too far into it, I want to start back just at what precedes this. At the end of Mark 2, you had a question about fasting, which was where the disciples were, where the Pharisees were asking why John the Baptist's disciples would fast, but Jesus's would not, and they were wondering what the deal was, and Jesus basically said, this is a new thing going on here, and while I'm with them, there's no need to fast. It's a different, and he goes through the metaphors of a untrucked cloth, the old coat, and the new skin, new and old wine skins, new wine, old skins, kind of thing. So there's a sense here that something is new going on, and so the old traditions that had been previously held to are not in necessary continuance. And the same thing about the Sabbath. He talks about, in this sense, they're wondering why his disciples were plucking heads of grain on the Sabbath for food. And Jesus brings up a time in a crisis when David actually went into the temple and took food out. And so there's a sense here that he's pushing, even on Sabbath, even on some of these laws, there are situations where the laws don't apply because of emergency or whatever. And so there's a sense here that when push comes to shove, the law kind of goes away, or is overblown. And so that it's an interesting thing to think about, and how this is moving forward with the Sabbath. But the big thing here is that Jesus is pushing on these old traditions. And that continues in Mark 3. That's why I wanted to open this up. He had just talked about the Sabbath. Now here he is again, pushing on the Sabbath. This is the man with the withered hand. Again, he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand, and they watched to see him whether he could cure him on the Sabbath, whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come forward." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. Now we talked about a couple of things about this picture. One was trying to imagine what it would be like to have a withered hand and restore it to health, because it's one of those things where the size of it would grow. We thought about, like a grape turning back into a raisin, or a raisin turning back into a grape, or and how, like, all of a sudden there's life in it, water, this kind of thing. And what an interesting picture that is. It's not like a healing where something that's broken is fixed. There's size, there's life, there's more added to this. But in terms of the Sabbath thing, look at this. This is what the part that I found the most interesting. He asks them, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath?" Now, one of the things about asking a question is, when you ask a question, you expect your audience to be able to give an answer. And in this case, this is really important, because that suggests that by asking this question, the people that he's talking to know the difference between right and wrong and can reason that, right? Because this is a reasonable. Is it better to do this or to do that? Is it okay? Is it more important? Is it better to save life, or is it better to adhere to restrictions of the Sabbath, right? He expects them to be able to answer that question. But look, it says, "But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger, and he was grieved at their hardness of heart," right? So it's an interesting thing. He thinks they should be able to answer it, that human beings have the ability to reason good versus bad on their own, but they, for some reason, don't, or they're unwilling, or they're unused to. And I think that's really kind of an important insight here that is about freedom, is that when you give someone the ability to make decisions when they haven't ever been allowed to make decisions before, there's some hesitation. When you give somebody some freedom, when you allow someone to live into the potential that they've been given, when they haven't been able to live into that potential before, there's resistance. And when I was teaching, we very much saw this. It's like that was our mission, was to teach our students to reach their potential. And it was a sense of setting them free so that they could do that. Because their initial reaction to being free, and push to reach their potential, was to resist. And it's such an amazing thing, the way that freedom, in a sense, works here. And Jesus comes up against it, and it says it angers him. It angers him that their hearts are so hard that they're unwilling to make this decision, that they would rather just go along with what the tradition was, what the law was, whatever, without ever questioning it. And he says, question it. By all means, make this decision. You should make it. And they can't. So what he does is he restores, looked around them with anger. He was grieved at the hardness of heart. He says, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. So here it is, right? This is one of those immediate causes of looking for a way to get rid of Jesus. Why? Because he's setting people free. And the trouble with setting people free is there's resistance from the old structure, and there's also resistance from within those people that had been free. We think about the Israelites when they're set free from Egypt. When they first run up against hardship, they say, wouldn't we rather go back there because at least we could eat? This sense of being able to stand on your own feet is difficult. Because we tend to get used to our chains. We think of that movie Shawshank Redemption, where the old man, he gets out early, and he doesn't have a life outside of prison because he's gotten so used to the chains that he has. Here it is. Finally, they're asked a question about morality on their own. They should be able to answer, but they can't, and that angers Jesus. And it's one of many here where we see the people not quite getting what he's delivering. All right, so that brings us to the next part, which is the multitude at the seaside. Jesus departed with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him. Hearing all that he was doing, they came to him in great numbers from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, beyond the Jordan, and the region around Tyre and Sidon. And he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because the crowd, so that they would not crush him. For he had cured so many, so that all who had diseases pressed upon him to touch him. Whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and shouted, "You are the Son of God." But he sternly ordered them not to make him known. Again, we see that pattern of healings and people flocking. That question we asked last week about are these people flocking just to be healed, or are they really understanding the message? And it's hard to really know that. But we see that the mob is very much out of control. They want a piece of Jesus, and they had to put him to protect him, outside of that situation. Here's something else that I wanted to attract your attention to. And I'd given this map out to the folks at Bible study. Here, let me pull it, make it smaller. Here, make me smaller, make it bigger or smaller enough to see. All right, so these are the places that are mentioned in this text: Tyre and Sidon, to Galilee, beyond the Jordan, Jerusalem, Judea, Idumea. Now, this is really important because this crowd that is gathered is going to be filled up with many different types of people. So again, we've been talking about Jesus breaking down barriers. He really is, because the crowd that he has around him are from Gentile areas. They're also from Jewish areas. They're Samaritans, other Israelite tribes other than Jews. Remember, the distinction of Jew was really those who had come back from the exile. And so you have this mix of people here, and they're coming from all different places, and they're becoming this crowd. Now, remember this crowd later on, because it's going to become really important as we continue. The next thing that Jesus does is he appoints the 12 disciples. He went up to a mountain, called to him those whom he wanted, and they came to him, And he appointed 12, whom he had also named apostles, to be with him and to be sent out to proclaim the message, and to have authority to cast out demons. So he appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder, and Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas and James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus and Simon the Canaanian, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Now, it's really an interesting, a lot going on here. He appoints the 12. He does so by going up on a mountain, and he does so by renaming. This is very much and absolutely a parallel to what Moses does earlier when he creates the tribes of Israel and sets them aside. This is just like Moses. So it is a sense that what Jesus is doing is he is taking and recreating the tribes of Israel, and they're being created not by bloodlines, but by what are the qualifications of the apostles here? He went up to the mountain and called to him those whom he wanted, and they came. So there are two qualifications. One is to be chosen by Jesus, and the other one is to be willing to come. And those are what these 12 disciples do and are. And they're from all different places within the framework of this. You can't really call them one type because there are so many different ones. And so again, in the last paragraph, we saw how people from all over the area are coming to Jesus from different walks of life. Now all of a sudden he's appointing 12, and so he's replacing the structure of what had been Israel, what had been the Jewish structure, with new. And this is based on his decisions and his selections and those who are willing to come with him. Now we move on. Remember here that we have a restructuring of the different definition of what God's family is, the people of Israel. Now we have an interesting thing where we have the restructuring of the definitions of Jesus's family. Then he went home, right? So Jesus goes home, and now we had a long discussion about whether this was house or home, or did he go to a house that was his home? Was his family there? Whatever. I think we eventually came to the conclusion that all of this is kind of happening at once. And when he says home, he means, the general area. The crowd came together again. So the crowd that has been with them, so they could not even eat, right? When his family heard it, they went out to restrain him, for people were saying, he has gone out of his mind. Now, so his family, Jesus's family, hears about what Jesus has been doing and thinks that he has gone, or the people think that he has gone crazy, and so they think that they need to intervene and try to help him. Now, we think about all the different times of those different weird passages within the other Gospels where Jesus says that he's come to bring fire and division and set family against family, father against son, and all of that kind of stuff. Here we see it happening live. His family does not want Jesus to be doing what he's doing because they love him, right? They love him. And if he's doing these things that are going to cause him to eventually get into trouble, they want to help him. But the other thing, it's interesting. I shared with them there's the Don Quixote, and there's in the musical Man of La Mancha, there's the song "We're Only Thinking of Him," right? And it's his family. They're worried because their relative has gone crazy, and when they're singing "They're Only Thinking of Him," it's obvious that they're really thinking of themselves. And so it's an interesting parallel of Don Quixote as a Christ figure, being kind of crazy and on the edge, and his family being concerned about him. But this shifts, I think the discussion shifts to what the scribes say, right? He's gone out of his mind. The scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, he has Beelzebub, by the ruler of the demons he casts out demons, right? So there's a sense that they think that he is possessed by a demon spirit. And he called out to them and spoke to them in parables. How can Satan cast out Satan? Interesting. He spoke to them in parables, right? He spoke to them in metaphor. He spoke to them in figurative. So they're accusing him of having a demon spirit, and he's going to use that kind of mythology back to them. How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but his end has come. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed the house can be plundered. Truly I tell you, people will be forgiven for their sins and whatever blasphemies they utter. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit can never have forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin. For they had said he has an unclean spirit. Right. So there it is. Right. He comes back to them with, if I'm Satan, why would I cast out my own things? That doesn't make sense. But he also says, you think you're blaspheming against the Holy Spirit because I am filled with the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is driving me. And you're saying that God's Spirit, the Holy Spirit, is not God, but a demon. And so there's where the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit comes from. So you're misrecognizing the Spirit and you're calling God Satan by doing that. And it's interesting, this language about a house divided doesn't apply to Satan necessarily. I mean, it may, but it really applies to them and the divisions within the house of Jerusalem, the divisions that he's been fighting against, Jew versus Gentile, different places that they come from, in and out, sinner versus whatever. All of those things are the divisions that Jesus is fighting against. And here he is again, doubling down on that exact thing. Now, here we go with it comes back to the family. Then his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him and called him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside asking for you. And he replied, who are my mother and my brothers? And looking at those who stand around him, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my mother, my brother, and my sister, and my mother. So he's restructured the definitions of God's family when he appointed 12 new disciples and apostles to kind of be the new tribes of Israel. And then he restructures the definition of his own family. My family is not necessarily done by bloodlines, just like God's family is not done by bloodlines, but those whom he chooses. Now it is the sense that whoever does the will of God becomes my brother and sister and mother. So the old divisions, the old definitions are going away, and it's not becoming about law and heredity and the past, but very much the now and the future. That's what this is about, now and the future. My family is defined by those who do my will. And that breaks down all of the barriers that he's been fighting against. So again, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, Jesus breaking down barriers. We see it in happening immediately, happening fast, and all of that is what's going on. So look forward to the message on Sunday. It's going to be around about this, the family of believers. We'll have communion, and it will be a great time. I hope you can join us for that. But I also hope you can join us for Bible study next Tuesday at 10:30. I'll see you then. Bye.